Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Not Your Mama's Murder, the podcast where each week we discuss a different true crime case. I'm Elisa Birdhill, and this week we are going to be talking about the case of Scott Peterson, or I guess it more likely should be called the case of Lacey and Connor Peterson. I hope you guys are enjoying this month of Peterson cases that we are doing. This is the second one. We have 2 to go. I am having a lot of fun with it. Most of these cases are pretty well known, and if you're here, I assume you know true crime. So I'm probably not giving you anything new, especially when there are so many documentaries and things like that surrounding these really well-known cases, but it is still fun to refresh my memory on and deep dive into. And so, with that being said, we will go ahead and get started. It was Christmas Eve of 2002 when 27-year-old Lacey Peterson went missing. She was also 8 months pregnant with her first child. She had named him Connor. Lacey had met her husband Scott in 1994. She gave him her phone number. Then she called her mom and told her that she had just met the man she would marry. It was a true case of when you know, you know. Lacey and Scott dated for 2 years before eventually moving in together. Then, after Lacey graduated college, they married. It is assumed it was just following their marriage that Scott began his first affair. Those details are still unknown to the public, though. This would be a pattern Scott would continue throughout his marriage to Lacey. Lacey, however, prided herself on being the best housewife to Scott that she could possibly be. Her mother and sister both said that she was devoted to being a good wife, and she was over the moon to be expecting Connor in February of 2023. I'm going to adjust my mic, and I could pause, but I don't want to, so just bear with me. I did not like the position it was in. Okay. On the evening before her disappearance, Lacey and Scott visited Lacey's sister Amy so she could cut Scott's hair, as she did every month. At the visit, Scott told Amy he would pick up the Christmas fruit basket that she had ordered because he would be playing golf the next day and would be near the place that she ordered it from. I mention this because it will be important later. Lacey also talked to her mom for the last time that evening at around 8:30 p.m. On the morning of her disappearance, Scott reported that he last saw Lacey at around 9:30 in the morning as he was leaving to go play golf. He said that she was watching her favorite show, which was Martha Stewart. She planned to bake cookies, mop the floors, and walk their dog Mackenzie. All of these seemingly small details would be very important to the case in the future. Scott changed his plans due to the weather that day, and instead of going golfing, he instead went fishing. His boat was stored at his warehouse, which basically served as his office, about 3 miles from their house. There was a cell phone call at 10:08 a.m. that police believe meant Scott was still at home because it pinged nearby towers. Now, I typically don't give my opinions within the story, but I'm afraid I'll forget if I don't say this now because there is so much to this case. 3 miles, in my opinion, isn't far enough away to ping a different tower than the same tower it would be if he were at home, especially depending on where the warehouse sits in regards to the house, and especially on a slow day like Christmas Eve. I think Scott was telling the truth when he said he left around 9:30 and that 10:08 phone call was likely made from the warehouse. Other activity from his warehouse office that day include checking emails and responding to emails from about 10:30 until 10:56 a.m. That is the last known activity from Scott until he arrives at the marina to launch his boat an hour and a half away. That timestamp that he got at the marina, it was for 12:54. Then he places a call to Lacey at 2:12, letting her know he was on his way home, but he wouldn't be able to make it out to get the gift basket as he had planned with Lacey's sister the night before, since he had gone fishing instead of golfing. That phone call went unanswered. I wish that I had the audio to put in right here, because on it Scott is very over the top, like, hey beautiful, and like it seemed very unnatural. Of course, I have no way of knowing what their relationship was like on the inside. Maybe that's how he always addressed his phone calls to Lacey, but just from the outside looking in, it was not great. Scott then arrives home around 4:30. He stated Lacey's car was in the driveway, but that she wasn't home, which was odd. And he also found it odd that he found Mackenzie the dog leashed in the backyard. He said he didn't think much of it and just jumped into the shower, throwing his clothes straight into the washer to get the fish smell off of them, and then he got a snack of pizza and milk. At this point, he noticed Lacey still wasn't home, so he called her mom and asked if she was with her. Her mom, of course, says no and is immediately panicked. It would be Lacey's father who called the police and officially reported her missing around 5:45 that evening. And I do just want to note here, he is technically Lacey's stepfather, but he raised her, I think, from the time she was like 2. That was her dad. So I just want to make a note, if you're doing your own research, it will say stepfather, but for all intents and purposes, that is her dad, so that's what I am calling him. Detectives Brocchini and Bueller responded to the call. They did an initial search, and they found Lacey's keys, wallet, purse, and sunglasses in the home. They also did an initial interview with Scott. He gave them all of the details I've told you so far and ran them through his day, just like I have. And when asked if there were any issues in their marriage, Scott said no. Neighbors were also questioned, and 15 of them had said they had seen Lacey out walking the dog between the times of 10 and 10:30 that morning. This would mean that whatever happened to Lacey must have happened after Scott left to go fishing. The following day, a massive search for Lacey and Connor began. Over 900 people showed up to help, including family, friends, and community members. A local restaurant even offered free meals to those who were helping. Along with that, police and firefighters on foot, bicycles, horseback, boats, and helicopters, as well as multiple K-9 officers, were searching. A command center for taking in calls and tips were set up, and over 150 volunteers helped run it. The husband of one of Lacey's friends created a website with information, and missing persons flyers were handed out. Quickly, a $25,000 reward was offered, which would later be raised to $250,000 and then eventually $500,000. There was a candlelight vigil held for Lacey and Connor on New Year's, and this vigil would end up being very, very important, because at this vigil, Scott Peterson called his mistress, Amber Fry, and pretended to be at the Eiffel Tower with friends celebrating the new year. The loud background noises that can be heard on that call, that is the other people attending the vigil for his missing wife and son. And I actually have that phone call, so I am going to play it for you now.
Baby?
Yes.
Amber? Yeah.
You can?
Yeah, hey.
My goodness.
I'm quiet, but pretty good, huh?
That's really good. Oh my god. Like then all this crazy static and stuff. I'm like, so frustrated.
I'm not even trying to control it. Working. Amber?
Yes?
Amber?
Oh.
Stop. Amber?
I'm right here.
Amber, you there?
Yes.
Amber?
I can hear you.
Hey.
Yes.
Okay, hang on. I'm talking.
Okay, I'm like, stay still or something.
I know. I gotta really make it work.
How was your New Year's?
What's that?
How was your New Year's?
It's good. I'm just, everyone's in the bar now. I came out of the alley. Quiet alley. Is that nice?
Yeah, it is. I agree. Very good.
It's pretty awesome. Fireworks there. The Eiffel Tower. There's some bands of people all playing rock songs.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty funny.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you guys decided to go out. Oh,
Definitely.
I can never remember your friend's name. I know Jeff, but you always say Swans.
Koala. And then we have Pasquale, a friend of ours, named up.
Uh-huh. Oh, he's there too?
Koala.
Good. New Year's resolution. What was that?
Should be.
Should be?
What should my New Year's resolution be?
Oh, I don't know. That was my question. Remember?
Oh, I didn't think of that. I'll tell something good.
Yeah, you have to tell me. So.
Okay, so a lot of that is hard to make out because it was in fact so loud because so many people had turned up to the vigil. Basically, he is saying he's at the Eiffel Tower and she asks his friends' names that she's with, saying she could never remember them, and he says Francois and Pascal. I'm unsure if he could actually not hear her or if he was faking the bad reception to make it seem like he was in another country, but either way, that's a pretty bad look when you're supposed to be at the vigil for your missing wife and child, even if you're not guilty. That's not the best look. Now, to be clear, Amber Fry is no Nicole Kessinger, which for those of you that don't know, Nicole is Chris Watts' mistress. And I won't get into that now, but I do have some very strong opinions about that woman. Amber was introduced to Scott through a friend, and she had absolutely no idea he was married. He first told her that he was single, and then he had told her that his wife had died and he was widowed. And just to be clear, he told her that about 3 weeks before she went missing. When she saw Scott on the front page of the newspaper with the header saying his pregnant wife was missing, she immediately called the police. This happened on December 30th, which is how we have that phone call from the vigil recorded, because Amber was a girl's girl and she immediately agreed to a phone trap to help get information out of Scott. So when he called her on New Year's, she was already working with the police and he had no idea that he was being recorded from his wife's vigil. Vigil? I think I said visual, but I definitely meant vigil. Scott actually never caught on to being recorded. For a while, he thought Amber had no idea that he was married or that Lacey was missing, until the police scheduled a press conference to update the public. But instead of Brokini or Bueller coming out to give this statement, Amber Fry walked out. Only police knew of the affair up until this point, so everyone was shocked, including Lacey's entire family, who had been backing and supporting Scott and even defending him when others would suggest that maybe he could have been involved. Following this press conference, Scott actually had the audacity to call Amber again and tell her that he was proud of her for participating in the press conference. In a follow-up interview after the press conference, Scott now admitted to the affair, as if he had any other choice, but he proceeded to say that it wasn't due to an issue within his marriage with Lacey, and that the affair itself didn't cause any issues within the marriage. He expected everyone to believe that Lacey knew about Amber and that she was okay with it. Which, listen, I am no prude. I know relationships look different for everyone, and open marriages and non-monogamy and polyamory is a thing. And I am completely okay with that. As long as everyone involved is an adult and consenting, then you do you. But I would argue that if Lacey knew about Amber, then Amber would know about Lacey and about Connor. And since she didn't, I'm led to believe that this is yet another lie from Scott. Now, something that people typically think in regards to this case is that this was a long affair, and I think that's due to the fact that Scott attended a Christmas party with Amber, and there are pictures of them looking awfully cozy together there. She's sitting on his lap. And then subsequently, there is a photo of Lacey alone, pregnant, at her Christmas party. So those two things, I think, made it seem like he was very deep into this affair. But actually, Amber and Scott had only met on November 20th, just 34 days before Lacey disappeared. They had been on 4 dates total. This, paired with the fact that it was December 9th, on the day that Scott told Amber his wife had died, police started to believe that Scott might be responsible for Lacey and Connor's disappearance, and that he was likely planning it for at least 2 weeks, but maybe even from the moment that he met Amber. One thing I do want to note here is that some people believe that if Scott did do it, his motive would have been not wanting to be a father, which, again, hello, Chris Watts, because I do not think that was his motive. As far as Scott. For Chris, that was absolutely his motive. But for Scott, it wouldn't make sense. Amber had a young child herself, so even if it was about not being a father or wanting to be with Amber, he would have still been playing dad, so to say, and raising a child, at least part-time anyways. In fact, for one of their 4 dates, which happened at a hotel room, which maybe Amber should have seen that as a red flag. But anyways, Amber either couldn't find a sitter or the sitter canceled, and so she actually brought her child with her on the date. She said that Scott didn't seem to mind and that he was very good with her child, which maybe she is a red flag for bringing a man she barely knows around her child. Anyways, I actually don't think that it had anything to do with Connor beyond the fact that Lacey was his mother, and maybe, and I think this is a stretch too, that he would be financially burdened by the price of raising a child. If you know true crime or Taylor Swift, you know that the case is often no body, no crime, especially when there is no suspected crime scene or even a sign of a struggle. Luckily for us and for Brokini and Bueller, that wouldn't be the case here. On April 13th of 2003, so almost 4 months after they went missing, the bodies of Lacey and Connor were found. And trigger warning here, but I do not want to sugarcoat anything. Just a fair warning, it's going to be graphic. I do mean that both bodies were found. Baby Connor had been expelled from his mother's body and was located separately from her. This happened because as Lacey was decomposing, her body built up gas and then her stomach ruptured. The ocean water rushed in and washed out all of her internal organs along with baby Connor. The only part of Lacey that was found was her torn torso. Her head, arms, and legs were all missing and to this day have never been found. Due to the way that she was found and her advanced state of decomposition, Lacey's death date was not able to be determined. Along with that, she had several broken bones, and the medical examiner was unable to determine if that was caused before or after her death. Obviously, having the bodies changed the investigation from a missing person to a homicide times 2. And because the bodies were found around the same area Scott admitted to going fishing that day, police started to suspect him more than ever before. Because of this, they did a deeper search of the Peterson home, cars, boat, and the warehouse. That search turned up a hair that matched one found in Lacey's hairbrush, twisted around a pair of fishing pliers on Scott's boat, as well as one homemade cement boat anchor. Traces of that cement mix were also found on the boat. Now, in regards to the hair, I will say my hair ends up absolutely everywhere. I think any woman can attest to that. So, if it were the hair alone that they found, I don't know that I would put much weight into that. But the anchors and the cement are going to be important, as we're going to get into. So then that makes the hair and the pliers look a little more suspicious. When asked about these things, Scott said that he had bought and used the cement to make an anchor for his boat about 2 weeks prior to Lacey going missing, which unfortunately for him, he didn't realize that he was proving their theory that he started planning at least 2 weeks in advance. Because the bag of cement was 90 pounds and it wouldn't take that much to make just one anchor, Scott was asked what he did with the rest of the cement, and he told investigators that he used it to patch a place in his driveway. They did locate a place in the driveway where it had appeared that Scott had just poured loose cement into the driveway, but no water was ever added. Police didn't necessarily believe that that was all of the cement, and that is mostly because they had already found 5 molds for the anchors. Their theory started to form a pretty strong case for Scott's guilt. They said that he made 5 anchors and used 4 of them, one on each of Lacey's limbs, to hold her down underwater. They said this explained why her torso was ripped away from her limbs and they hadn't washed up. Due to their suspicions, police began monitoring Scott via his car's GPS, but unfortunately for them, he switched cars, so they were no longer able to track him. So instead, they just started the old-fashioned form of following him. And as they did, Scott drove further and further and further south, as if he were heading for the Mexican border. Scott Peterson was stopped and arrested on April 18th of 2003 in San Diego. He had cut and dyed his hair and dyed his facial hair, which was new. He had just grown the facial hair and then dyed it. His car was full of camping and survival equipment, and he also had nearly $15,000 cash on him, along with his brother's ID and 4 cell phones. They were sure that they had caught him just in time because he was about to make a run for it due to the bodies being found. Scott would defend this by saying that he changed his appearance to avoid the media and that he only went to San Diego to play a game of golf with his brother and his father. And not to defend him, but he did grow up in San Diego, and that is where most of his family still lived. So I can't explain the rest of the things in the car, but going to play golf, I'll give him that. He was booked and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, and he, of course, pleaded not guilty. Due to how highly publicized the case was, his trial was moved to another town in order to find a fair jury and provide Scott with his right to a fair trial. Scott hired Mark Garagos to represent him, and though Amber was only a witness, she hired a lawyer too. Her name was Gloria Allred. 22 days into the trial, I scrolled too far. I'm so sorry. 22 days into the trial, a juror had to be dismissed after being caught talking to Lacey's brother. Though he didn't even talk about the case, it was still technically against the rules of the court. The rest of the jurors were then reminded not to read, watch, or research anything about the case. I only say that because, of course, it comes up in the future. The prosecution argued that Scott killed his pregnant wife to be with Amber Frey, and that he was literally and figuratively ready to burn his life down for the woman he had only taken on 4 dates. Mark Garagos said police jumped to conclusions when it came to Scott's guilt. He said most of the state's evidence was nothing but a coincidence. And I'm going to take this moment to remind you all that circumstantial evidence is in fact evidence, but I digress. Garagos offered potential other causes for Lacey's disappearance and subsequent murder. Maybe someone kidnapped her to steal the baby, and then when the case picked up medical attention, they cut their losses and killed them both. They even pointed to a robbery that happened on the same street as the Petersons' house on Christmas Eve. They suggested that maybe Lacey saw the robbery take place and confronted the thieves, so they killed her to keep her quiet. But those robbers were actually interviewed and admitted to the robbery, but denied any involvement in Lacey and Connor's murders, and they actually passed a polygraph, which we know is inadmissible in court, but it stands. The theory with how the bodies would end up in the same body of water Scott was in, but how Scott didn't put them there, was that the police had announced publicly where Scott was when Lacey disappeared. So whoever killed her saw that press conference and decided to dump them there in an effort to make Scott look guilty. Garagos argued that the police made the evidence fit Scott rather than following the evidence to whoever the real killer or killers were. Despite the earlier warning from the judge, yet another juror had to be removed during the deliberation phase because she conducted her own internet search of the case. The jury foreman also requested to be removed after he received threats from the other jurors. I hate to say this, guys, but based on jury misconduct alone, that's gotta be a mistrial. Scott Peterson could be innocent, he could be guilty, but at the very least, he did not receive a fair trial. You have to deem that a mistrial so that he cannot come back in his appeals and say that he was denied his right to a fair trial. But no mistrial was granted. Alternates filled the place of the jurors that were removed, and the jury convicted Scott of 2 counts of first-degree murder on November 12, 2004, just 8 days short of 2 years since he had met Amber. And in case you were keeping track, the trial lasted 5 months. On March 16th of 2005, he was sentenced to death and to pay $10,000 towards Lacey's funeral costs. In October of 2005, it was decided by a judge that the $250,000 life insurance policy that Scott had on Lacey would go to her mother. Scott was originally taken to Sam Quinton's death row, and he remained there for a while, but after many appeals by his lawyers where they threw everything at the wall to see what would stick, apparently except for jury misconduct, but that's my own opinion. His sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he was moved out of San Quentin to Mule Creek State Prison, which, even had this not happened, he still would not have been murdered by the state of California because California no longer enforces the death penalty. In 2024, the LA Innocence Project took on Scott's case, stating that new evidence would prove he didn't kill Lacey and Connor, but so far all of their filings have been denied. And I do want to note that the LA Innocence Project and the Innocence Project are two very different entities, and so when you're researching the Innocence Project, it is amazing. It does great things for great people. The LA Innocence Project, in my opinion, allegedly, likes to take on cases that have names connected to them just because. So, I just wanted to note the difference there. I got to tell you guys, in a situation like this, I am typically an Occam's razor girly, meaning that the simplest explanation is usually the truth. I do think that is pretty fitting here. Scott was the only one with means, motive, and opportunity to hurt Lacey. But I do think I have a little bit of an unpopular opinion about the case. People are quick to say that if those eyewitness neighbors saw Lacey from 10 to 10:45, then Scott must be innocent. But I cannot help but wonder why we haven't considered that he went to the warehouse office where he checked his email, responded to emails, and that's when Lacey was seen by the neighbors when she was out walking Mackenzie. Then Scott went back home, and that's when whatever happened to Lacey happened. Remember, he didn't arrive at the marina until 12:54, and the last activity from him before that was 10:56. So that's an hour and 58 minutes to make a drive that only takes an hour and a half. So as long as he leaves by 11:15, 11:20, he still makes it to the marina by that 12:56 timestamp. That leaves 20 to 30 minutes for him to go harm Lacey and load her up into the truck. And as we learned with Brian Koberger, it can be done quick. In fact, strangling, which allegedly, in my personal opinion, is likely how he did it, given the lack of physical evidence, blood, things like that. It only takes 2 to 4 minutes to strangle someone with your hands. I've never heard anyone mention that he could have gone back home between the warehouse email check and the marina. We know that he originally planned to go golfing and decided to go fishing, and his reason for that was that it was too cold to go golfing, but we don't know when he changed his mind. Was his plan to go check his emails and then go golfing, but then he went home, something happened with him and Lacey, he strangled her, and then said, oh, I can go, quote, fishing and get rid of this body. Which I'd also like to know, it's crazy to me that you would drive 3+ hours round trip to fish for less than an hour and 15 minutes. And that doesn't even account for the time it takes to launch the boat and then to get the boat back out of the water and load it onto the trailer. Desi cheers an hour away from home, and anytime I have to make the drive for a class that only takes an hour, it feels silly because it's an hour there, I wait for her for an hour, and then we drive an hour home. So it's 2 hours for 1 hour. I mean, I'll keep doing it because that's my child and I'll do anything for her and make her dreams come true. But to go fish on Christmas Eve with a pregnant woman at home when your plans were to golf? No. I can't see it. I'd actually understand more if he had told Lacey that he was going golfing or fishing, but he really went to see Amber. At least that would make sense. So to me, it reads as he had a reason to be there, like dumping a body. Really, who says it's too cold to go golf, but instead goes out on open water to fish anyways? If it's cold on land, I'm guessing it's going to be much colder out on the water. As I said though, while I do think that Scott Peterson is guilty and a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence can stack up to make a convincing case, based on the jury misconduct alone, he should have gotten a new trial. I understand a jury would be hard to find given the publicity, but I think when you're talking about someone's life, it is important to do your due diligence. The system only works if the humans make it work. As far as the voice of public opinion, I think this one is actually pretty 50-50 split. A lot of people think Scott is innocent, and which is very unlucky and maybe kind of a jerk and absolutely a cheater, but not guilty. One pretty big name that supports him in the true crime space is Ellen Marsh. She is the host of the I Think Not podcast. She believes with her whole heart that he is innocent, but she is by far not the only one. Truly, I think it is one of the most 50-50 cases I have ever seen. Now, that's all I have to say about Scott Peterson. I'm looking forward to another Peterson next week, but I did want to say that since I recorded my last episode, the podcast reached 5,000, oh my goodness, I'm jumping ahead, 500 downloads, which means the absolute world to me. Podcasting is so weird because you don't know if people are going to listen or be interested or can stand your voice or whatever. So with that being said, I did just want to say thank you for being here on the journey of the Peterson cases and the podcast itself. As far as Peterson cases go, we're halfway down, two to go. I am super excited. And I know I asked this in my closing, but please, 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 if you've made it this far, go give me a rating and review wherever you listen. The more you do that, the more the podcast will get pushed out into the algorithm and we can get more listeners in here. Share with your friends, follow on all the social media outlets. I know it sounds silly, but for a small independent podcast, it really does make a difference. If you aren't following on Facebook and Instagram, make sure you do that because I do post weekly visuals to go with the episode. So if nothing else, follow for that. I appreciate you so much all for being here and making this possible for me. And again, please leave a rating and review. Thank you so much. See you next time.